police! Open the door now! Get on the ground! Hands up!
Imagine it's the middle of the night. The house is quiet. The world feels safe. Then, boom, boom, boom. The door shakes like it's about to break. Before anyone can breathe, armed officers storm inside. Guns raised. Voices shouting. Flashing lights slicing through the dark. A mother screams. A father freezes. And a little child clutches the floor, shaking, not understanding why monsters wear badges. They're yelling commands, but they're at the wrong house. In those few terrifying minutes, something breaks inside that child, a sense of safety that may never fully return. This is a true story of a black family's nightmare, and how one child's trauma turned fear into a $3 million fight for justice. It was supposed to be an ordinary, quiet night in a Chicago neighborhood where nothing ever seemed to happen after dark. Streetlights hummed softly. Snow pressed against the windows. Inside a small apartment, Anjanette, a single mother, was doing what she did every night, trying to give her son a sense of normal. Her 8-year-old son, Jamal, sat cross-legged on the floor, pieces of a school project spread around him, cardboard, markers, big ideas. He talked nonstop about what his teacher would say, about how proud she'd be. Anjanette smiled, tired but happy. Moments like these were her reward. By 11 p.m., Jamal was in bed. Lights off, door cracked. The world felt safe. Then, bang, the front door exploded inward. Before Anjanette could even scream Jamal's name, armed officers flooded the apartment. Boots pounding, guns raised, voices shouting commands that made no sense. Flashing lights turned the living room into a blur of fear and confusion. Hands up! Don't move! Get on the ground! Anjanette froze, heart racing, trying to explain, but no one was listening. In Jamal's room, the noise sounded like thunder. His bedroom door flew open. Strange men filled the doorway. Dark uniforms. Weapons. Faces he'd never seen before. His mind couldn't understand what was happening. Only that something terrible had come for him. He crawled under his bed, pulling his knees to his chest, pressing his hands over his ears. The floor vibrated with footsteps. Shouts echoed through the walls. His safe place, his home, was no longer safe. Minutes later, the shouting slowed. Confusion replaced aggression. Someone checked an address. Someone whispered. Someone swore. They had the wrong house. Apologies came quickly, awkward and hollow. Officers backed out the way they came, leaving a shattered door, scattered belongings, and a silence heavier than the noise before. But the fear didn't leave with them. Jamal stayed under the bed long after they were gone, shaking, breathing fast, eyes wide. That night, something invisible but permanent was taken from him, the belief that home meant protection. For the police, it was a mistake. For Anjanette, it was terror. For Jamal, it was a night everything changed. By morning, the apartment no longer looked like a crime scene. A temporary door was installed. Furniture was put back where it belonged. Broken pieces were swept into trash bags and carried away like they never mattered. From the outside, it almost looked normal again. But inside that home, nothing was the same. Jamal didn't come out of his room that morning. Anjanette found him sitting on his bed, fully dressed, backpack on, staring at the wall. He hadn't slept. His eyes were dark, his small body tense, like he was bracing for something terrible to happen again. "Baby, it's okay," she whispered, kneeling in front of him. "They're gone." Jamal didn't answer. At first, Anjanette told herself it would pass. Kids were resilient. People said he'd forget. Time would heal it. But days turned into weeks, and the fear stayed. The boy who once bounced a basketball down the hallway every afternoon stopped touching it altogether. The sneakers by the door stayed clean. When neighborhood kids knocked, Jamal shook his head and crawled back into his room. At night, the nightmares began. Jamal would wake up screaming, soaked in sweat, convinced someone was breaking in again. Sometimes he hid under the bed, Just like that night, refusing to come out even when Anjanette begged him. Other times, he clung to her, shaking so hard she could feel it in her bones. Loud noises became enemies. A car backfiring, a knock at the wrong door, sirens in the distance. Each sound sent Jamal spiraling, heart racing, breath shallow, eyes darting the corners that held invisible threats. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. School became another battlefield. Once eager and curious, Jamal now struggled to focus. Teachers noticed he jumped at sudden movements. He stared out the window instead of raising his hand. When asked questions, he froze, words trapped behind fear. One afternoon, the school called Anjanette in. "He's a good kid," the teacher said gently. "But something's wrong. He's somewhere else." Anjanette already knew. Doctor visits followed. Counseling appointments. Long questionnaires filled with questions no 8-year-old should have to answer. Do you feel unsafe at home? Do you have bad dreams? Do you think something bad will happen again? Jamal nodded through most of them. The diagnosis came quietly but hit like a punch to the chest. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, a word Anjanette had heard associated with war zones and soldiers, not children who should be worried about homework and recess. The doctor explained how trauma rewires a young brain, how fear could become permanent if left untreated. This wasn't just scary, the doctor said. It was overwhelming. His sense of safety was shattered. Anjanette sat there, holding her son's hand, guilt crushing her even though she knew she had done nothing wrong. She replayed that night over and over, wondering if she could have protected him, if she should have done something differently, if her voice could have been louder. Jamal started sleeping with the lights on. He insisted on checking locks multiple times before bed. He asked questions Anjanette didn't know how to answer. "Mom, can police come back? Mom, what if they make another mistake? Mom, will they believe us next time?" There was no comforting lie strong enough. She watched her son carry an invisible weight no one else could see. In public, he looked fine. At home, he was fragile, like glass already cracked once, terrified of breaking again. Medical bills piled up. Therapy sessions became routine. Anjanette adjusted her work schedule, sacrificing hours just to be there when Jamal needed her most. Some nights she cried alone in the bathroom, careful not to let him hear. The officers who had stormed in that night never came back. No real apology. No follow-up. No accountability. To them, it was an error in paperwork. To Jamal, it was a lesson burned into his young mind. Safety can disappear without warning, and the people meant to protect you can become the source of fear. Yet, somewhere beneath the trauma, something else quietly grew. Jamal began drawing pictures during therapy. At first, they were dark, doors breaking, figures with guns, shadows filling rooms. But slowly new images appeared. A house standing strong. A child holding his mother's hand. A badge crossed out with the word wrong written underneath. Pain had found its voice. Anjanette noticed it too. Beneath her helplessness, a fire began to form. Her son's suffering couldn't just be accepted. It couldn't be brushed away as collateral damage. What happened to Jamal wasn't just tragic. It was unjust. And though neither of them knew it yet, this hidden trauma, this quiet suffering, was about to become the spark that forced the system to listen, to answer, and to pay a price far greater than money. For a long time, silence felt easier, not because Anjanette wanted it, but because speaking meant reopening wounds that never fully closed. Every time someone asked her to tell the story, she could see Jamal under that bed again, hear the boots, the shouting, the fear trapped in his chest. But silence came with its own price. Bills kept arriving. Therapy sessions stacked up, and the city that had torn through their lives continued on like nothing had happened. No investigation, no accountability, no acknowledgement that a child had been broken by a mistake that never should have occurred. One evening, while Jamal sat at the kitchen table drawing, Anjanette watched him pause at every sound outside. She realized something then. If she stayed quiet, this would follow him forever. Not just a trauma, but the message that what happened to them didn't matter. That was the moment she chose to fight. She started by telling their story to a legal aid office, then another, and another. Each time, her voice shook at first, but with every retelling it grew steadier, stronger, less afraid. Lawyers listened closely. This wasn't just a botched raid. It was a pattern. Wrongful police raids were disproportionately tearing through black homes, fueled by bad intelligence, rush warrants, and careless assumptions. Families were left traumatized and abandoned, and children like Jamal were paying the highest price. When they agreed to take her case, Anjanette felt equal parts relief and terror. A lawsuit meant exposure, depositions, cross-examinations, strangers dissecting the worst night of their lives in cold, legal language. It meant Jamal's trauma would be questioned, measured, and possibly doubted. But it also meant someone was finally listening. The city pushed back hard. Their lawyers called it an honest mistake, an unfortunate error, a procedural issue. They spoke about paperwork, addresses, technicalities. They did not speak about Jamal. Courtrooms became their new reality. Anjanette sat upright, hands clasped tightly, as officers described the raid as routine, as if it were just another box checked on a long list of nights that blurred together. She wanted to scream that her son was not a statistic, that his fear had a name, a face, a future. When it was her turn to testify, her knees shook. She spoke about the door exploding, about seeing guns pointed inside her home, about hearing her child cry in a way no parent ever forgets. Then came the hardest part. She talked about what happened after. The sleepless nights, the therapy, the diagnosis, the way Jamal checked locks like a ritual, the way he flinched at uniforms. Across the room, Jamal sat quietly beside their attorney. He didn't speak, but his presence said everything. Small shoulders, big eyes, a child forced into an adult battle. The defense questioned everything. Was he really traumatized? Couldn't this just be fear that would fade? Wasn't he doing fine in public? Anjanette held her ground. Trauma doesn't always scream, she said. Sometimes it hides. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it grows louder with time. What shocked everyone was Jamal. He never cried in court, never lashed out, never broke down. Instead, he sat there with a calm far beyond his years. When asked to draw how he felt, he sketched a small house surrounded by giant shadows and a tiny figure standing in front of it, refusing to move. That drawing made its way into evidence. Advocates began to pay attention. Civil rights groups spoke out. Child psychologists testified about the long-term effects of traumatic police encounters on young black children. Experts explained how early fear can shape a lifetime of anxiety, mistrust, and emotional pain. This wasn't just about one family anymore. It was about a system that moved fast with guns, but slow with responsibility. The pressure built. Media outlets picked up the story. Headlines questioned how many other kids had been forced under beds, hearts racing, because someone didn't double-check an address. Through it all, Anjanette stayed standing. On nights when doubt crept in, Jamal would quietly slide one of his drawings toward her. Pictures of them holding hands. Pictures of a house with a strong door. Pictures with words like safe and home written carefully at the bottom. His courage became her fuel. This fight wasn't about revenge. It was about being heard. About making sure no one could say, "We didn't know." And slowly, painfully, the silence began to crack. Time moved forward, but the scars did not fade. Years passed between court dates, hearings, and delays that felt endless. Jamal grew taller. His voice deepened. His drawings changed. But some nights, the same fear still crept in quietly, unannounced, just like the raid that had started it all. Therapy never stopped. Doctors, counselors, and child psychologists followed Jamal's progress carefully. They spoke of improvement, but never of erasure. Trauma like his didn't simply disappear. It adapted. It hid in corners. It resurfaced when least expected. In court, experts testified with precision and care. They explained how Jamal's brain had learned to live in survival mode, how his nervous system still reacted as if danger were always seconds away, how a single night of terror had reshaped his sense of safety, trust, and control. This wasn't temporary fear, one specialist said. This was a foundational injury. The city's attorneys pushed back harder than ever. They questioned timelines. They questioned diagnoses. They questioned whether a child could truly be affected for so long by one incident. But the evidence told a different story. Medical records showed years of consistent treatment. School reports documented struggles tied directly to anxiety. Therapists explained the pattern. Clear, uninterrupted, undeniable. Most powerful of all was Jamal himself. No longer a little boy. He spoke softly but clearly when asked about that night. "I didn't think we were safe anymore," he said. "I still don't, sometimes." The courtroom fell silent. That sentence, simple and devastating, cut through every argument the city tried to make. This wasn't about policy, or procedure, or paperwork. This was about a child who had lost his innocence because adults failed to slow down and double-check. Behind closed doors, pressure mounted. Civil rights organizations cited the case as a glaring example of systemic negligence. Community leaders demanded change. Media coverage intensified, shifting from what happened to why it keeps happening, especially in black neighborhoods. Statistics were revealed. Wrong door raids. No-knock warrants. Mistakes brushed aside as rare. But Jamal's story gave those numbers a face. And the city felt it. Quiet conversations began to replace aggressive courtroom tactics. Negotiations stretched late into the night. The tone shifted from denial to damage control. Then came the moment Anjanette had almost stopped believing in, a settlement discussion. At first, she didn't celebrate. Money had never been the goal. No amount could give Jamal back the sense of safety stolen from him. No check could erase the sound of boots in the hallway. But this wasn't just about compensation. It was acknowledgement, responsibility, an admission, without saying the words, that the city had failed. When the final agreement was reached, the number stunned everyone. $3 million. Not as a prize, not as a reward, but as recognition of harm. The funds were designated to support Jamal's long-term care, therapy, education, stability, and the freedom to heal without financial fear looming overhead. More importantly, the case forced change. Raid procedures were revised. Verification rules tightened. Oversight increased. Mistakes like the one that shattered Jamal's childhood were no longer brushed aside so easily. Officers were required to slow down, to confirm, to understand that behind every door was a family, not a target. When the judge finalized the settlement, Anjanette closed her eyes, not in relief, but in release. Years of fighting, years of being doubted, years of reliving the worst night of her life. It hadn't been for nothing. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Microphones hovered. Reporters asked questions about justice, reform, and accountability. Anjanette answered calmly. "This was never about money," she said. "It was about my son, about making sure what happened to him doesn't happen to another child." Jamal stood beside her, taller now, steadier. He didn't smile for the cameras, but he didn't hide either. Later that evening, back at home, something small but powerful happened. For the first time in years, Jamal locked the door once, then walked away. No double-checking, no pacing, no panic. Anjanette noticed. Her heart tightened. It wasn't healing complete, but it was healing beginning. Justice hadn't arrived loudly. It hadn't fixed everything, but it had shown up, finally, with weight, with meaning, and with consequences. And for a family once shattered by a single mistake, that moment marked a turning point. Not just in a case, but in a life slowly finding its way back toward safety. Today, Jamal is no longer the frightened little boy hiding under a bed. He's older now, Tayer, more confident in the way he carries himself. The fear that once ruled his nights doesn't control him anymore, though his memory still lives quietly in the background, reminding him how far he's come. The settlement changed their lives, but not in the way people often imagine. Yes, it paid for the best therapy available. Specialists who understood childhood trauma. Safe spaces where Jamal could speak, draw, and heal without being rushed. Sessions where fear was unpacked slowly, carefully, until it lost its grip. But the money also bought something just as important. Asterisk, asterisk time, asterisk, asterisk. Time for healing without financial panic. Time for Anjanette to be present. Time for Jamal to grow at his own pace. A college fund was created, not as pressure, but as possibility. A quiet promise that his future wouldn't be defined by that night, that he could dream freely again. Even more powerful was what Jamal chose to do next. Instead of running from his past, he faced it. He began speaking at community forums. Nervous at first, voice shaking, hands clenched. But each time he shared his story, his words grew stronger. He talked about fear, about trauma, about how one mistake can echo through a child's entire life. People listened. Parents hugged their kids tighter. Advocates pushed harder. Officers asked questions they'd never asked before. Jamal wasn't angry. He was purposeful. He joined programs focused on police accountability and youth advocacy. He helped create safe dialogues between communities and law enforcement, spaces where children's voices were finally centered. And Jeanette watched it all with quiet pride. There's no amount of money that erases trauma, she said in one interview, but it gave us the tools to rebuild, and it gave my son his voice back. Their bond, already strong, became unbreakable. They laughed more. They talked openly. They healed together. Some nights. They still sit at the kitchen table, just like before, but now Jamal talks about plans instead of fear. College, advocacy, helping kids who don't know how to explain what they're feeling yet. The home feels safe again, not because nothing bad could ever happen, but because they know they can face it together. Jamal keeps one of his old drawings in his room. The house, the shadows, the small figure standing firm. It reminds him of where he started and how courage can grow even in the darkest moments. Their story didn't end with a settlement. It began with healing, with purpose, with a future reclaimed. And in a world where fear once broke into the door, love became a lock that could never be forced open again. This family story reminds us that even the darkest nights don't get the final word. Fear may arrive suddenly, but courage can grow quietly. Through love, community, and persistence, justice can still break through the cracks. What happened to Jamal should never have happened, but what followed shows us something powerful. Pain doesn't have to end in silence. It can become purpose. It can protect others. It can change systems. If you or someone you love has faced something similar, know this, you're not alone and your story matters. Share this video to spread awareness. Like and subscribe for more real stories of resilience and justice. And comment below, what's one thing that gives you hope? Thanks for watching. Stay strong.